Do we have any public comments related to the closed session agenda?
No, we do not.
All right, then let's recess to closed session.
Right.
We'll reconvene the closed session at the end of this meeting. So we will begin, continue along with the open session here. We have a patriotic exercise that will be led by Jemiah Woodfin, and she's a 5th grader at Washington Elementary. Do we have Jemiah?
Unfortunately, we have not been able to find her in the meeting.
All right, maybe we'll wait a minute.
Principal Coleman said she's coming to give her 3 minutes. She's trying to connect.
Okay.
I will keep searching for her in the list and I'll let you know as soon as she's in.
All right, so we'll just wait.
You can, or we would have to skip it.
How about we wait a couple minutes? She's trying to
Couple minutes, yeah.
I see her in here. Give me 1 moment.
Hi. Glad you made it. You're on mute right now.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Maya.
Hi.
So you're going to lead us in the patriotic exercise. Did you have anything you'd like to say first?
Yes. I was just going to say hi. My name is Jemiah, and I am a proud Black young girl in the Burlingame community. And I have 2 sisters, and I enjoy cooking for my parents and riding my scooter and playing with my sisters. And if you count kindergarten, this is my 6th year as a Washington Wildcat, and my younger sister's 4th year. And we have an even younger sister who we know will one day be a Washington Wildcat too. And my hope for the near future is that all races will come together and be equal. And yeah.
Thank you. Would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Put your right hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. It was really great to see you, and I wish you the best at Washington.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Bye. All right, so now we're on to the roll call. Trustee Wong,
Here.
Trustee Reed,
Here.
Trustee Sarpango,
Here.
Trustee Mudd,
Here.
and I'm here, Trustee Kendall. Okay, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Do we have a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay, so that was Kate made a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Lisa made a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes from February 9th?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from February 9th.
Okay, Kate made a motion
I will second it.
and Lisa made a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So now we have public statements related to non-agenda items. I'm going to read the summary of the public statement procedure. So public statements. At the discretion of the Board of Trustees, the public may address the board on non-agenda topics and/or agenda items. If you choose to make a public statement, you will need to complete and submit the district's Google form for public statements. This can be found on the district website, www.burlingameschools.org. So you click on district, then you click on Board of Trustees, and the link to the form is on the right-hand side. The moderator will call on you. Please note that comments are limited to 3 minutes. The board president may increase or decrease the amount of time allowed for public presentation depending upon the topic and the number of persons wishing to be heard. If your comment is on an item that is not on the agenda, then you will be asked to speak during the public statements related to non-agenda items at the beginning of the meeting. If your comment is on an item that is on the agenda, then you will be called on to speak at the time of the agenda item. So Kirsten, do we have any public statements related to non-agenda item topics?
We actually had 2, but unfortunately both attendees are not at the meeting.
All right. I guess we'll move on then. Unless you have something to read out.
No, the speaker needs to be public. I
Okay.
mean, present, sorry.
Okay. So then it's public statements related to agenda items, and we'll be coming to those statements during the actual agenda items. Item number 12 is the union statement from the Burlingame Education Association. We have-
One moment, President Kendall. It'll be Stephanie Talbot from Franklin. I will unmute her.
Great, thank you.
Stephanie, you're unmuted.
Hi there, good evening.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Talbot and I am representing the Burlingame Education Association, BEA, this evening. I am the BEA representative at Franklin, as stated. First, we would like to thank the board for allowing BEA this time to speak at the board meeting. We believe that this time will be valuable and allow BEA to update the board members and our community. On Monday, our elementary schools started the high flex learning model, allowing for all TK through 5 in-person learners to come on campus. High flex is a term that I recently came across and thought applied to BSD's current learning model. According to Columbia University Center for Teaching and Learning, high flex combines the terms hybrid and flexible. Hybrid learning refers to learning that integrates complementary face-to-face, that's our synchronous learning, and online learning, the asynchronous learning experiences. All students in hybrid learning are expected to undergo the same combination of online and in-person activities. In contrast, the flexible aspect of high flex is that students are given choice in how they participate in the instruction and engage with material in the mode that works best for them and their families. In high flex learning, students can choose from one of 3 participant paths. 1, participate in the face-to-face synchronous class session. 2, participate in face-to-face class sessions via Zoom. Or 3, participate fully asynchronously, which is our independent studies in our district. Due to the fact that students and families in our district are able to choose which learning model works best for them, the high flex learning model seems to be more of an appropriate term to use. While the students have the choice in which model works best for them, teachers are teaching to all 3 of these groups at the same time and twice a day. It is a tremendous amount of work, and I have the utmost respect for my colleagues. During President's Week break, I went to campus and saw several colleagues prepping in their classrooms, and this was just at one site. This was just one day I was there. I know there were others and at other sites as well. This is a lot of time and energy and planning that teachers and staff members have continuously invested in order to make this high flex learning model work. Since we did try to switch to this high flex learning model 2 prior times, there was a feeling of preparedness when the TK through 2nd grades arrived on February 4th, and 3 through 5 this past Monday. There were many excited faces coming onto our campuses. Since the playgrounds are closed, students have engaged in other safe forms of play during recess time. There have been some challenges with the implementation of this learning model. With such short amount of time with each session, teachers are trying to get in as much teaching as possible. We are trying to learn how to engage with both in-person and virtual students simultaneously, allow our roomies and our Zoomies to communicate, collaborate, and connect with each other, and find the time to prepare for our daily activities and the asynchronous learning. As Parent-Teacher Conference Week is coming up on March 22nd, the BEA would like to thank the District Office Administration for asking for BEA's opinion on the alternative dates, as the previously scheduled dates did not work with the high flex learning model. We appreciated the opportunity to give our input on this. The BEA looks forward to continuously sharing at our future school board meetings. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so next we have a statement of a principal.
That would be Principal Kristen Coleman. Let me unmute her.
Okay.
Principal Coleman, you should be unmuted and able to turn your camera on.
Hi, everyone. I believe it's Principal Lawrence this evening.
Give me one moment, and let me see if Principal Jude Lawrence is on here. Principal Lawrence, you should be unmuted.
Hi, I know this is going to be a big disappointment now when you're all expecting Principal Coleman. I cannot see how to turn my camera on. I don't know if that's me being useless.
I actually have experienced the same thing.
Right. Okay. I don't appear to be able to turn my camera on. I just have a raised hand. So I'll just talk.
We can definitely hear you.
Now I can. Hello, hi. Nice to see everybody. So yes, our big news since our last update is that our 3rd through 5th grade students returned this week. Incredibly exciting new development. Did raise some anxiety levels before the break. I'm not going to lie, I did lie awake, turning things over during the vacation. As more and more students come back onto campus, so the sense of responsibility that we as an admin team feel to keep everyone safe intensifies. So we checked and double checked our numbers. We went over our procedures and arrangements at the same time as Stephanie mentioned, as our teachers prepared their classrooms and schedules for our new arrivals. It all felt worthwhile on Monday morning, though. Every BSD campus experienced a huge amount of excitement. Many smiling faces, lots of photographs marking the historic return. It was a slightly different kind of energy with the older students coming back. This really was a return for most of them, not a first. So there was more familiarity with the grounds, with the buildings, with the teachers, but still that incredible sense of joy from all of the students coming back. Different schools now have different levels of in-person attendance. We've got almost 80% expected at Hoover next week, around about 70 to 75% at Washington, Lincoln and Roosevelt. But here at Franklin, we just have 54% of our students back, actually lower this week because a few families are quarantining. But next week, we're expecting 54% back. All of our families and students figured out all the procedures incredibly quickly. At Franklin, we were worried about how long pickup and drop off was going to take, but we've been timing it and we were down to 6 minutes today. So we're all feeling very proud of ourselves. There are a few shout outs that the admin team would like to make today as a result of our return, our expanded return to campus. The first one's to the behind the scenes essential workers on each campus, the custodians, the lunchtime supervisors, the instructional and behavioral aides, the secretaries, my goodness, what would I do without Stephanie, the librarians, or I should probably call them YouTubers these days, the tech whizzes that we have, our nurses, our gardeners, the DO staff. They rarely get mentioned, but we really couldn't function without them, and they do an incredible job. Another shout out for our students who came back with an amazing positivity. Yet again, they have adapted to a new way of doing things, and we continue to watch in awe as they figure it out again and again. Another shout out to our communities, all of our communities, our families, and who sent messages of support, who organized all of the testing for the students, who opted not to travel over the break or to gather, who continue to distance learn this week in order to keep our staff, students and their families as safe as possible. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Franklin PTA, who've been unwavering in their support since the pandemic began. I so appreciate their backing of all my possibly over-engineered procedures, their continuous messaging of the collective responsibility that we have as a community, their cheerleading for our wonderful teachers, and all their thinking and actions that are helping each one of our students. And I know that my colleagues feel similarly about their PTAs. I'm not going to thank our teachers this evening, but I'm going to congratulate them. They have continued to show up for our students every single day since this began. It's been the most tumultuous time in all of our lives. And every student has had a teacher that's been a positive presence in their lives, be it virtually or now in person. And I think this consistency and stability that our teachers have provided to our students in a world that's been turned upside down has been something that illustrates the professionalism of our staff. I like to congratulate every one of them on their ability to keep adapting. This time with concurrent teaching, Stephanie talked about high flex. Concurrent teaching is another one of those wonderful educational buzzwords. I actually experienced concurrent teaching in the classroom the week before the break, and my experience was way less impressive than anything that I have seen in any other classroom in Franklin since. Students were super sweet as they informed me that I don't need to shout when I'm so close to the screen, and that I needed to click the spotlight for them to actually see what I was doing, and I shouldn't have the camera pointing towards the TV, or there were way too many Mrs. Lawrences to look at. Anyway, our teachers are doing a stellar job, and I know that they're only going to get better, just like they did with distance learning. I'm going to finish up now with just expressing excitement about vaccinations, and thanks to our superintendent, the county, the board, everybody who had a part to play in getting the vaccinations set up for us. We really are very excited that we're taking another step back towards normalcy. Quick plea for parents, if there are parents out there listening, extend us a little bit of grace tomorrow. Staff have to get vaccinated between 9 and 4, so most of them are trying to get it done in lunchtime or after school, but just in case we are scrambling to cover classes at the beginning of session B tomorrow, be patient with us. Thank you. I think that's it. I think I've rambled on enough now, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have, or I can simply stop talking.
Jude.
Thank you.
All right, next we have our statement by our Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, Marla Silversmith. You are on mute.
Try it this way. So Jude, you knocked it out of the park. So I'm just going to briefly say a cute little story. I was out of school yesterday when students were getting dismissed, and this student ran up to his mom and he goes, "I had no idea my teacher was so tall," because they've just been looking at a little screen. So seeing them stand up, it was so sweet. And it was great to see all the 3-5s come back, and it's in a really exciting time. Another thing just to give an update on, if you remember, the Burlingame School District is a part of a larger grant with San Mateo County Office of Ed around mental health. And we have joined forces with a company called Care Solace, which is a wonderful organization that we can work with. Either an employee can work with them for themselves, or we can also refer families, and they match families with direct mental health providers. So it's amazing. For instance, for myself, they would look at my insurance and look at what I'm looking for. Do I want a female? What do I need for my own child? And then they would match us with a list of people instead of parents having to do that work. So it's been a great resource so far. We're piloting it until June, so we'll have more information that we'll bring back later at the board, but that is something that we've really been working with lately to try and work around our mental health needs for our students. And again, it's also available to staff. So Allison Bell, our HR specialist, has joined in on the training so that if a staff needs support, she can also refer them to get help. So another little spotlight on things going in Burlingame. So thank you.
Next statement is our statement of from our superintendent, Chris Benitez. Can't hear you.
That's because I have multiple microphones going. My apologies. So good evening, everybody. I just I want to celebrate a couple of things that were mentioned, and I did send out a video message today as well. But if you haven't heard, and for the community, it's a big celebration. I know Ms. Lawrence mentioned it. Vaccines are here for educators. And because of the collaboration of all the superintendents in the county, all 24 of us worked with the County Office of Ed and the county superintendent to actually develop a weekly day of vaccination just for educators. And we prioritized folks through an equity index of districts that got to go first, second, third, all the way out through 24th, as well as the folks in those districts, which were prioritized to those that were working directly with children already, which includes, of course, our elementary school staff. And the exciting news was that, first of all, we learned that about 20% of our staff had already managed either in Tier 1A, they qualified for one of the Tier 1A vaccinations, or they had already gotten their own appointment through private insurance. But the exciting news today was that appointment windows went out to most of our other elementary level employees. Very few did not get one today. And that means that they will be vaccinated tomorrow. So as you heard Principal Lawrence mention, our vaccination day is on Wednesdays, and almost all of our elementary school staff either have an appointment for sometime this week or have had their first or second vaccinations. We're actually well over 90% that either have an appointment or have vaccinations scheduled for this week. And that's huge, right? We're seeing all about vaccinations across the state and across the country. People are scrambling to get them. And imagine that within the next week, more than 90% of our elementary school staff will have already had at least one vaccination, right? Way ahead of where we thought we would be. Super exciting. It's matched up very well with our return to school. And we were able to get on that priority list and get everybody signed up so quickly because we were already serving students, which was one of the key factors that we used to make the determination. So happy that that's working out. I got so many lovely emails from folks confirming they got appointments and that they were so excited. And so it just made me smile, on top of seeing the successful 3rd through 5th return this week. The principals, the teachers, the staff knocked it out of the park again. It was a well-organized, very thoughtful return. I couldn't have been prouder or more excited. It was another emotional day. It was a return, as Principal Lawrence mentioned, and it was exciting. It's kept energy up. A lot of positive interactions with teachers. They were just so excited, as were their students. It was just a very, very positive 2 days, and it continues. Tonight's topic at the study session, I'll be talking a lot tonight, so I'll stop here. Is not as exciting. It's about reductions and getting our budget in line, which is why we're doing a special session this evening. But there's a lot to celebrate out there right now, and I'd like everybody to keep that in mind because it's making me hopeful. After a really, really tough year, I'm feeling hopeful.
Chris? So now we have the statements of our board members. Trustee Wong, do you have a statement?
I just want to say, congratulations to the staff and teachers and the students who are finally back in person. So exciting. And then the vaccination news is so great. And I feel like we're walking on this sort of tightrope while we have to thread some needle at the same time. And we're just somehow making it work. It really, I think there's some luck in there, but so much is about the relationships and the skill and competence we have in our district. And that includes our parents and the children just complying with the masking and everything. I'm so grateful because you really don't need to watch too much news to realize that it's very, that there's a lot of dysfunction out there with some other districts not too far from us, and they're making national headlines, which I'm so glad we're not that. So I think that it really reflects also that we've had a well-working school district for a long time, and that when a lot of stress is put on a system, you start seeing where those holes are and things fall apart if it wasn't very good before. And I'm just so grateful that we were a high functioning district before the pandemic. And now we're seeing how that's really benefited us in terms of making this work with so many moving parts and so much stress across the board in every group. So I'm just really grateful for everyone's hard work and patience. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Reed?
Thanks. I actually don't have a lot to say that hasn't already been said. So just a huge thank you to everyone in the district office, all of the teachers, all of the staff, everyone that's made it happen. I've been walking my kindergartner and my fourth grader to school for the last 2 days and just seeing people on the streets of Burlingame again and walking their kids to school, smiling faces. It's so nice to see people out again. I happened to be coming down Truesdale at 3:05 today and realized as I was coming upon traffic that it was school traffic. And I'm so used to doing that trip and that route and not having any traffic, and realized that that was happening again. So it was just a realization. It was really exciting. And I'm super excited to take my sixth grader to BIS tomorrow for the first time. So a lot of excitement in our house right now. The only other thing that I just want to put a plug out there, the BCE Gala is coming up too. Just make sure that that's on everyone's radar. It's going to be on March 20th, and their auction is going live March 11th, and we'll close the day after the gala on March 21st. So tickets are on sale now, and it's all on their website. And it's their big kind of final push from an event fundraising standpoint. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Trustee Sarpango?
Thanks. No real comment today. Echo everything that's been said. Appreciate everybody, and let's just keep trying to move things forward. Thanks.
Turn. Is it my turn?
Oh, yeah. Do you have a statement? Sorry.
Yeah. I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said, but I just want to reiterate this week, Burlingame School District sent almost 2,000 of our elementary school kids back to the classroom safely. Tomorrow, our sixth graders will set foot for the first time as middle schoolers on campus. 20% of our teachers have already been vaccinated, and the rest have the opportunity to be vaccinated tomorrow. It's such an amazing week, and there's just so much to celebrate. We still obviously have so much work to do, and we have to continue to write our legislators, and I hope everyone on this call tonight will be encouraged to also write our legislators. But I'd also encourage everyone to take a minute to write their teachers and staff and principals and Mrs. Silversmith and Mr. Montbonitis, and thank them as well, because as Miss Talbot from Washington mentioned, they're working tremendously hard, and it's been a really successful return. So.
Yeah, I also just want to echo what everyone's saying. It's been pretty amazing. It's so, I dropped off my fourth grader. It's so calm and peaceful, and everyone's just happy to be back at school. So exciting. Those fifth graders are getting to close out their year. And excited to see what happens with, to see BIS go back tomorrow. And at the next meeting, we'll hear all about that. I did want to mention, we've had a couple meetings since the last board meeting. Met with Lisa and I met with the city as part of the BSD City District Liaison Committee. And it was great to exchange information with them to keep us all on the same page with what's going on with the rec program versus the school programs, and keep that in sync. And then also Florence and I met with San Mateo Union High School District Liaison, Lihia, and had another good discussion about how our districts can work together and what that partnership means. All right, so let's move on with this this meeting, and we have item number 17, which is our budget reduction discussion. Kirsten, do we have any comments related to this agenda item?
Yes, we do, President Kendall. One. Would you like it now or after?
Chris, it looks like were you saying something?
Typically at the beginning, because the presentation is going to leave time for discussion of trustees at the end. And it's not going to be super long. I will desperately try to make it as brief and thoughtful of your time as possible, but public comment should certainly occur before I launch into that.
Okay, so let's have the public comment then, please.
Okay, there's one. It's Leanne Dietrich. I will unmute you, Leanne.
Thank you. Hi all, I wanted to first express my appreciation for all the visibility we've gotten on the budget issues to date. You've been great about giving us the opportunity to become semi-educated. And with that semi-education, then when I have a heightened awareness. So when I see things like my kids taking the survey about playground equipment that will be changed out this summer, or in a previous board meeting when there was furniture that was coming or new furniture that we bought for the classrooms. While those are exciting things, I then worry, are we tapping into the same budget that we are challenged with this bigger topic? And so I can probably make some assumptions that maybe some of these things come from restricted budgets, like we know Measure O is tagged for certain things, et cetera. But without visibility, I don't know. And if they are the same thing, I'm sure we'd want the opportunity to express our opinions of where we think the priorities are. So I guess my ask is just that when we do have some of these spend things that come up and we have visibility to, either through surveys or through the board meetings, that you give us some insight to whether or not these are competing for the same funds that we're challenged with in the overall budget situation. So it's your own fault. You've given us great information. And so we're always looking for more and more. Thank you very much.
Let me do one more check, President Kendall, to make sure we don't have any additional comments that came in. That's it, President Kendall.
All right, thank you. So Chris, do you want to take it away?
Sure. And I loved the question, Leanne. You've been a very engaged member of the community, and you always are thinking and asking questions. So I'll actually start there because it's a great question to start with. So what we should probably do, and I'll try to remind us, and I know Kirsten's here, so she'll not need much reminding. She usually reminds me of everything, but any board item that requires any kind of fiscal commitment, we should be listing the amount of the fiscal commitment of the item, even if it's on consent. So like our contracts, for example, list how much they each cost, but we should also be listing the source. And so just to start with tonight, when we talk about school budgets, we talk about what we call Fund 1 in school accounting. Fund 1 is the general fund. It does contain actually both restricted as well as unrestricted resources and dollars, but it is all the operations of a school district are essentially paid for out of Fund 1. All of the items that Leanne brought up, and it's a really good question because some of them are big price tag items like, $1 million worth of furniture. They're all funded out of Fund 21, which is our capital improvement funds, also known as our bond fund. So those are Measure M and Measure O dollars, and they're restricted. The reason they're in a separate fund is they actually can't be spent on regular school operations. It's not legal to do so. It can only be spent on capital projects. And so that's a great suggestion. So when we put items on the board agenda, we will be listing not just the fiscal impact, but the source. So we'll either say Fund 1 or Fund 21 or Fund 13, which is, for example, our nutrition services fund. Anything other than Fund 1, just for everybody's general reference, we don't use for general school operations in general. So with that being said, I am going to start the presentation. Tonight's study session is focused on the reductions. We've had a lot of conversations throughout the year about the status of our budget. I'm going to overview that briefly. On tonight's agenda, the agenda included 2 items, which were the 2 fiscal presentations that we presented last fall, as well as this January. The first one last fall was the first interim report. And it's funny, it's called the first interim because it's actually the second or third report financially that we do in a school district. The first one every year is the budget adoption, which happens by the end of June for the following year. And then if it's a major revision within the first 45 days because of changes made at the state level, we do a 45-day revise, and then a first interim. So the first interim is the first significant financial report that we did this year to update the board and the community. And we did a town hall presentation on the status of the budget at that point. We did town halls, we did staff presentations, we did PTA council presentations, we did BCE presentations. We did a lot of presentations and got a lot of really helpful feedback, email and otherwise. So that presentation is included on tonight's agenda for reference, as is the presentation that we just did at the January regular board meeting, which was the update of our fiscal outlook based on the proposals being made by the governor in the January governor's proposal. Now, they are just proposals at this point, but we wanted to show the potential impact, particularly because the biggest impact was in restoring a slight increase year over year to our funding formula, which helped us out significantly with our future of our fiscal situation. So that's the starting point where I'm going to go tonight. Tonight is for me to present the recommendations to the trustees to explain exactly what it is that I'm recommending on behalf of staff, that we do, what actions we take to get our budget in line, and the impacts that those recommendations will have. And then it's open for trustees to discuss and ask questions at the end of the session. And I would encourage trustees to ask questions that, even though you might think you know the answer to because you've had to sit through so many of these financial presentations, ask questions that you want one another to be aware of, as well as the community to be aware of. And that's all of our community, whether it's teachers or administrators or parents or community members at large. So with that, I'm going to start my screen share, and I am going to be using a PowerPoint. So I will be able to hear you. Please interrupt if you need to, but I wanted to be able to make sure that everybody could see what we're doing here. Great. So the presentation is the budget reduction and fiscal health budgets board study session. And tonight, like I said, I'll be giving the board recommendations based on all the prior budgetary conversations and presentations that we've had this year. So far this year, just to outline the discussion again, and the other presentations are available for reference if folks don't have them. So to date this year, we've already adopted a budget as well as a 45-day revise, which updated our adopted budget that had the district in a conditional budget certification status and a lack of a going concern in 2 years, according to the required multi-year projections that we produce. And this was certified by the county in its oversight function. So what does that mean? It means that a conditional certification of your budget means that they do not see that you can meet all of your financial obligations for the current and 2 more years. And the lack of going concern means that in one of those 3 years, the current and the 2 next years that we're required to project, lack of going concern is what in education we call bankruptcy of a school district. So it was significant enough that the county had sent us a letter saying that our budget was conditional, requiring additional oversight, requiring that we make changes to get back to a positive certification. And the lack of going concern was because in the 2nd year out in our projection, we did not have enough resources to meet our obligations any longer. Burlingame has a complex fiscal situation. It has, we had this issue because we had a very static funding over the years, and we also had declining revenues, both from complications of COVID, which required more financial outlay, as well as locally declining enrollment. We did also have the complexities, sort of good complexities, in that we had a lot of local fiscal augmentation from both our educational foundation, BCE, which always does such a wonderful job for us, as well as a local parcel tax. However, all of these things together, COVID, declining enrollment, folks not necessarily understanding the funding formula, as well as additional funds coming in locally that totaled $2.4 million from BCE and another $2 million from our parcel taxes, but yet having a deficit, a structural deficit. It was really confusing to people. And there was a lot of complexity to untangle in that situation, which is what we spent a lot of the first 6 months of the year doing and making sure that we were explaining to people, which led ultimately, of course, to those presentations throughout the district. We also internally had a lack of adequate controls and fiscal planning. For example, we didn't even have dynamic position control so that we matched our annual staffing levels with enrollment. We just continued to roll positions over without a whole lot of discussion or oversight, which was leading to some cloudiness in the budget picture. So we couldn't sort of dynamically and resiliently respond to our annual fiscal situation. We were always sort of a little bit behind with that. So all of those things were sort of the discussion and the picture up until this point. What progress have we made so far this year? So the progress has actually been significant. We did institute position control that is being well maintained now by our budget and our HR offices in cooperation with one another, which is as it should be. That's an ongoing conversation. It requires a lot of maintenance. And we are doing an annual staff analysis to make sure that our staff matches the enrollment of our district, and that it could move around from year to year. So we have to be able to move staff to match where students are coming in and where the instruction needs to occur. As I mentioned previously, we've done multiple presentations and analysis, and we've changed those presentations to meet the needs or the requests of communities so that we can help them understand better our fiscal situation. We've also modified our presentations this year to try to make them more accessible to our parent as well as our teacher and staff community, so that folks can be more informed and they can ask questions, and that we can be more transparent and garner the input that we need. We've engaged in a thorough budget review, the process of our budget and how we manage our budget. And that streamlining and review of the budget yielded significant savings, hundreds of thousands of dollars of just making sure that we were doing a better job at more real-time budgeting and responding to changes as they occur in the educational marketplace, the educational economics of the state. We've improved our multi-year projections so that we have far more accuracy when we look at projections, and we always make sure that we share the assumptions that we're working on so that folks can understand how it is that we're coming to those numbers. And we revised our presentation format for consistency and transparency, not just for the public, but also for the board, and tried to key people in and teach people about how to look at the multi-year projection, always the most important slide in any fiscal presentation in a school district, so that they know exactly what it is to look for to make sure that we're in good fiscal health. That all led to the first interim this past fall, returning the district to a positive certification, meaning that we had enough money in reserves to cover all of our obligations for this year and the next 2 years. We still had a significant structural deficit left, but it was a huge first step, all those changes that we made to get back to a positive financial situation. The initial budget proposal and discussion from the governor in January added more potential good news to the picture, which is why in January we did another budget update to let the board as well as the community know how the budget situation was evolving. And it was a significant evolution in a positive direction for us. So to remind everybody, this is the big picture of where we were at the first interim last fall. You can see that at budget adoption, we had about a $1.4 million projected deficit this year. And you can see how that changed between the operating budget and the fall first interim due to all the cleanup and the work that we did to make sure that our budget was being maintained and projected more accurately. That was through the efforts, of course, of our fiscal department led by Heather Park. And so they've really done a good job at cleaning it up and making it a tighter budget, a cleaner budget. And it gave us a more accurate picture moving forward of what the situation looked like financially for the district. So even though we returned to a positive certification in 22-23, so in 22-23, we still ended up with enough money to meet the minimum 3% reserve, we still have a very significant deficit that in the next year out, the year after the required current +2, we were still back in a rough situation financially being a lack of a going concern. It was just out the next year past what the county monitors. So that was as of last fall. And then with the January budget news, mostly the COLA, the cost of living adjustment, being provided by the state and reinstated, you can see how dramatically it shifted the picture for us. So this was what we presented last month. Again, the multi-year projection being the most important view. And this is again in unrestricted general fund, the one that the state likes us to report on. So we still are seeing a deficit this year and in the coming years. So we still needed to do something about that. And then you can even see that the deficit for 23-24 is still significant. And the reason for that is that's when all of the current reduction in enrollment actually hits the books. So the reduction in enrollment doesn't hit all at once. The state actually typically lets us have that reduction a little bit spread out over 3 years. And because of the pandemic, they've actually been holding us harmless, which is great for the current years. But of course, it makes the cliff when they actually stop holding us harmless look a little bit big and scary out here. So, but still a net positive improvement in our overall fiscal picture because of the January budget proposal. Now, it's not 100%. It hasn't been agreed to by the legislature yet. That'll occur in May and June. But we think that the COLA, from everything that we're seeing in the discussion going on at the state level, that doesn't look to be a controversial proposal at this point. We're seeing other controversies. People are hearing about, the governor had a return to school plan. The legislature has now responded with Senate Bill 86, which is their return to school plan. They added another $2 billion, which the governor is saying he's vetoing. But all of that is just sort of background noise at this point, because really what we're looking at is our annual funding, not special one-time funding, not funding that makes up for money we've already spent that may or may not come in the future, but the ongoing funding. And that's what the COLA provided for, and that's reflected in this multi-year projection. So when we had the old projection, we talked about approaches to deficit reduction to take care of that $4.3 million deficit, the one that we had it at the first interim report. And so we were talking about 3 approaches, the all at once and the pros and cons. This is actually the slide I presented at the town hall to think of the 3 different approaches for reducing our deficit. And at that time, before the January revise, I was going to be proposing tonight to the board that we take the middle way, which would have been significant reductions, about $3 million this year, and then trying to take care of little bits and pieces in the next several years by not spending more and being very careful with the way that we're spending. That was going to be very painful, but we were going to have to do it because of how serious our budget situation was. And that was going to be the recommendation. But now, with the January governor's proposal and the reduction being much less significant for the coming year, I'm proposing a new approach. And my approach or my recommendation this evening is based on a couple of things. So the assumptions it's based on is that the governor's January budget proposal is adopted in May or June in regard to the COLA, which is the significant assumption that has gotten us into a better fiscal situation. It's also under the assumption that both BCE and the parcel tax revenues remain stable for the foreseeable future, and that our attendance and our enrollment remain relatively stable after this year, after we see what happens next year, that it remains stable. So I'm proposing a somewhat measured and fiscally conservative approach. I always, when I was a CBO, I always told my boards, you pay me and you hire me to be fiscally conservative so that we stay in good financial shape. And so I'm taking on that role for the board and for the community this evening because a lot of my proposals aren't typically that conservative. They're strategic and they tend to be a little bit daring at times, but fiscally, my job is to be conservative so that we're in good financial health, so that we can keep the school district going in good standing. So my proposal will be that we do initial reductions this year, which the reductions this year would result or yield no certificated layoffs. So that's in our teaching ranks, our certificated employees, those that work directly with our children as far as educational expertise, no layoffs would be yielded from the proposal this evening. The majority of positions overall that I'm going to suggest that we reduce are vacant by the end of this year. That could be either through retirement, or we had a vacancy earlier this year and we just didn't fill it because we knew we were in some financial trouble and we wanted to have something to be able to eliminate that didn't impact a person. So this approach is very thoughtful and careful to minimize the impact on both the classroom and on the Burlingame educational program. But this also requires, since this is sort of a minimal approach as far as reductions, it's going to require that over the next 3 years that we're very proactive at reducing positions as they are vacated, either through retirement or people leave to move somewhere else, that if we absolutely don't need a position, that we don't backfill it because we still have that large looming deficit in a couple of years. So every year we're going to have to be very thoughtful at which positions we have to refill and which ones we don't. Now notice, this is not a fix-all recommendation tonight. This will provide the district with 2 years of solvency, and it will actually have not just a positive budget certification, but it will provide an anticipated slight budget surplus. Now this is before negotiations, which are open, but the recommendations will provide 2 years of solvency and give us that time to work on the deficit projected for 23 and 24 with the tools that we've put into place, the more dynamic staffing and position control, and being very thoughtful about the positions. So the proposed reductions, and these are in positions, I would remind everybody, and this is the first time these are being presented publicly, so they need some explanation, which I'm going to provide. So these reductions, the majority of these reductions are of positions that, again, will be vacant at the end of this year through various reasons. This is where our early announcement incentive really helped us, because people told us instead of waiting till June or July, they had to tell us by the end of January to get the incentive. So we have a better idea this year of positions that are opening. There are a couple of positions which are still occupied, which would mean that if they're occupied by the end of the year, it will result in a layoff. But none of those are going to be in the certificated ranks. The money or the dollars that are listed next to these positions are total comp. Total comp means it's inclusive of the cost of the employee's salary, benefits, payroll taxes, and any other incidental costs incurred by the employee. For example, the contribution of the employer to their retirement system. So in education, the employee contributes a portion and the employer contributes a much larger portion. So these are total comp numbers because the total comp is the figure that we would be saving through the reduction of these positions. So in the management reductions, DO means district office, and that's the location. DW, by the way, means district-wide, which means that they might not be housed at the district office, but that they serve a district-wide function. So at the district office level, in management, a coordinator of student engagement, a director of innovation, and then we do have some management savings because we have a fantastic new management level employee who is a first-time manager, and we reclassified it as an entry-level management position. And you can see there were significant savings yielded from that reclassification since we had a senior manager vacate that position. We also had, in doing this analysis of our staffing, we found that we had 2 folks classified as management that actually didn't qualify as management employees under Ed Code. Or through not just Ed Code, but the role and responsibility. They're actually classified positions. So we did sign a letter with CSEA, and we moved those 2 positions out of management and into the CSEA union because they were misclassified. So you can see in future presentations that the total comp for those 2 positions will be listed under the classified ranks because they were misclassified, which sort of artificially inflated what we were doing in the management ranks. So those are the total comp amounts that were taken out of management spending. Under classified reductions, we have a district-wide wellness coordinator, 1 aide from BIS, overstaffed 1 aide. That position, the person in that position will go to another aide position at a different site. A district office application specialist, that was an IT position. That was vacated, and we have reorganized so as not to refill. a district office accounts payable position, which is not being refilled and closed. A district office receptionist position, same thing. It was actually reclassified, and that position will not be refilled. And the admin assistant of ed services is being eliminated. We combined some of our admin assistants, and we are continuing forward with 2 confidential admin assistants, and we eliminated the other admin assistants in the district office. Under certificated, again, all of these will be vacated or are already vacant right now. So one position of program specialist, which was a district-wide position, and that was a program specialist largely for special education, although they took on a lot of other responsibilities as well. One K-5 PE position, one speech and language position, which was district-wide. Our speech pathologist serves students at multiple sites, so it's a district-wide. One partial FTE, it's a 0.833 of a world language teacher, and one learning center FTE. Again, all of these will be vacant, either vacant now or they will be by the end of the year. So how does this plan compare with the original fair share model, which was what was proposed when we started on this journey late last summer? The original fair share, remember, the target was 4.3 million, which has changed significantly, but the percentage of the fair share reduction was based on how much are we spending in the 4 categories that we can divide the district budget into. And so we were looking for a relatively fair amount from each of the 4 categories. So we spend 12.8% of the district-wide budget in management, and so the fair share of 4.3, for example, would have been 551,000. So I wouldn't pay as much attention to the amount because the amount of the target has changed, but the percentage for fair share would remain the same. So 12.8% should have been from management, 11.2 from classified, 10.5 from supplies and services. So that's everything that's not people. So that tells you that 90% of what we spend money on is people. And then certificated 65.5. So the proposed reductions are equaling a projected $1.9 million in ongoing savings. And the management reduction proposal, as including the reclasses, is a savings of 714,000 in ongoing savings, or 38% of the total reduction. Classified reduction is about $600,000 or 32% of the total reduction. Supplies and services is interesting. We could have done a few reductions here, but we're actually pretty tight. The majority of our supplies and services budget are things that we actually can't reduce. They go to things like workers' comp insurance and property and liability insurance and our utility bills. There wasn't a whole lot of wiggle room there. And so there is no proposed reduction in supplies and services moving forward. Certificated reduction is 573,000 or 30% of total reduction. So I just want to pause a moment and see what we are actually reducing versus what a fair share would have been. So obviously 38% of the reduction coming out of the management, when only 12.8% would have been fair, tells you that we slanted pretty heavily towards management classifications as well as our classified classifications. That made up for the fact that we couldn't reduce from supplies and services. And more importantly, at this time, it held our certificated reductions to a minimum, since our target was supposed to be about 65.5, and it's only going to comprise about 30%. And again, as I mentioned earlier, all those positions are going to be vacant, requiring no layoffs in the certificated ranks. So what are the pros and cons of this methodology? So the pros, we do gain fiscal stability for the short term. So for the next 2 years after this fiscal year, which should give us time to address medium term, 3 to 5 years out, through using attrition and restructuring more gradually and being very thoughtful about what positions are absolutely necessary to continue operating. Most of the reductions at this point are being taken out of, as was illustrated by the previous slide, out of central or shared positions. to minimize the impacts on program with few layoffs due to incentive program or attrition, meaning that that program really helped us do that planning so that we weren't impacting occupied positions. And reductions have been minimized in certificated ranks, as I pointed out earlier, with no layoffs in certificated ranks, again, due to the incentive program, as well as taking out of the management and classified categories more heavily. The cons. The reductions here are inherently unfair. So instead of a fair share methodology, we actually are taking an approach of being very aware that we are not following that fair share, but we're doing that by design to try to minimize the impact to our program and our classrooms. And we're trying to be strategic for the time being because we could do it in those other areas. This also means that management and classified ranks that we're serving district-wide function are going to be reduced to a pretty thin level. So we already only have at all our elementary schools only one principal per site. The district office and district-wide positions are going to be pretty minimal. They are already, and we're reducing the vacant positions, but we're also reducing positions as people leave, as well as doing a couple layoffs in those areas. And that means that there will be an impact. So for example, thinning the ranks of my staff, which I'm doing consciously, means that we just won't be as agile as we've been this year. We have been able to respond to things very quickly. It's going to be a heavier lift for the fewer positions in the future. The other issue here under the con is that if we can't over the next 2 to 3 years reduce to meet that next need a couple of years out to right size our budget, it's going to have to be more from certificated ranks, because we really are not leaving extra in the management or classified. So we're taking more out of management and classified now, but that means that the extra that's going to be left are largely going to be in certificated if we're not able to right size the budget in the next couple of years. But this does, although it does improve our long-term fiscal outlook, it means that we're going to have to be super conscious of the dollars that we spend, which means constant, careful fiscal management. That goes again back to, do we absolutely have to refill positions as people decide to move on, so that we can continue to yield savings, so that we're in better shape a couple of years out when we see that large structural deficit come back. So I put in these next two slides because after a lot of our presentations, I had a lot of folks, and I know the board did as well, had folks ask why we were continuing a TK program, which they know is optional for the district. And so I wanted to address that, because I don't want folks that have made some clear arguments to feel that they were being ignored. So I do want to address that, because you'll notice that you did not see that on my proposed reductions this evening. So why are we not looking there when it's not required and our enrollment's been following? So our community and stakeholder presentations did lead to a lot of suggestions about potential reductions and cost savings, which we appreciated. That was the whole purpose, as well as education. And a consistent one that I want to address publicly this evening, so folks don't think that we're ignoring the suggestion, is TK. So why was TK communicated by the community as a reduction, right? So that sort of surprised me that people wanted to offer something that I should be looking at. So essentially the arguments boiled down to a couple of things. Folks point out that TK is optional. That is true. It is not required that school districts offer. It started when the preschool and Head Start enrollment dates were changed as a one-year sort of stand-in for school districts to offer for parents that were left out of enrolling in Head Start and preschool, and it's continued to only be offered to sort of a narrow band of age ranges. It's only a 3-month essential enrollment window. So it is true, it's not required, but we have offered it. It is not offered at all of our neighboring districts. That's also true. It's not reflective of our community demographics, meaning that particularly since we've moved all those TKs to Franklin, it has become a bit skewed in that our TKs don't reflect the demographics of our district anymore. They've become skewed. This was actually presented a couple board meetings ago. They no longer reflect the district because it requires a lot of mobility. Because they're no longer housed at our community schools. They're all at one site, which parents need to be able to transport children to, and which is actually at one of the far ends of our district. It is only open to a narrow age range of children, and enrollment has been declining over the past 3 to 4 years since all of our TKs were located at that single site. So those are all actually true things. They weren't particularly persuasive arguments to me from an educational standpoint, although they are all factual. The most convincing argument for me, because I had to look at this in a fiscal light, was that TK isn't fully funded, right? It's not only optional, but the state doesn't give us the money to run the program that it actually requires to operate the program. And so that is a true statement, and that was the most compelling one. However, I think that TK needs further thought, and so I'm not recommending it for reduction this year. Early childhood education is extremely important to the long-term success of many of our youngest learners. More importantly and exciting for me this year is that Governor Newsom has been advocating for years to both broaden the ages that TK is allowed to serve, as well as filling the funding gap that school districts have by hosting TK programs. In other words, instead of them costing districts money, that they would fully fund potentially a TK program. That is a proposal that is actually on the table this year. And they are just proposals at this stage, but they could be interesting components to make our TK more sustainable for longer term, and that it wouldn't cost the district more to run than we get to operate the program. And enrollment is something that I think we can look at as far as reviewing the program programmatically and as far as curriculum and instruction for community accessibility. So I'm actually going to recommend that it not be reduced, even though I know that I've received a lot of traffic over it, and that we will be reviewing it and measuring it and reporting out to the board and to the public to monitor those very issues that have been brought up. The governor's proposal, if it's adopted, it's not a permanent solution, but he is proposing between 1 and 3 years of fully funding the program. And so however long he's going to fully fund the program, I would really like to see if we can address some of the issues that have generated. So that is the reason that it is not in the proposal. So this is our opportunity for discussion from the board. So I will stop sharing my screen and be able to see everybody's faces again.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have questions?
I have a question. So Chris, just since you were just talking about TK, how much does it cost and how much do we get from the state for it at this point?
Yeah, annually, our TK program costs anywhere between $400,000 to $420,000 a year to run. And depending upon the mix of kids and how many kids we have enrolled that year, we yield anywhere between $250,000 to $275,000 a year.
I have a question. The enrollment reductions, I know we're being held harmless for the next couple of years. Will the number, so when I'm trying to figure out how to say it, if we see enrollment go back up over the next few years, will we still have to take a dip at some point to cover the decreased numbers this year and next year, or will we not take a dip at all?
That's really interesting. That's a great question. If we were not to dip at all, then actually you get to regain that funding.
Okay.
Right. So essentially so it would be considered a temporary dip. And so they basically level it out so that you never receive that funding cut. Okay. However, and I'm not trying to be a wet blanket, right? Our enrollment was already plateauing and sort of going up and down a little bit every year when I arrived. And then we saw a significant reduction this year from COVID. That's not unique to us. Districts across the state are reporting 10% or more decline in enrollment. The thing that's a little concerning demographically for California is the enrollment that we're losing is disproportionately, it falls in mainly into two categories. It falls into students who have families that are living more on the margins of our community, and it's a very expensive community to live in. And so that's probably the largest chunk of the enrollment loss that we've had this year, right? So I'm anticipating, for example, our Title I students, we're gonna have far fewer. The other section falls actually on the opposite end, and that is parents that have the means that they were able to choose other options for this year during a COVID year. And many of them have communicated to us transparently that they will be back when school comes back as normal. So they either chose a private option, or maybe they owned a home or had family in states that were doing a more regular school schedule than California, or even in other countries where they have residency. And some of them chose to homeschool. We had a family, a lovely family that is homeschooling 5 of its children until we're back in a regular environment. However, I'm saying that as a caveat, we cannot anticipate to get back all the enrollment we've lost. We're being told very clearly by the statewide experts that feed educational admin information that the largest loss has been out of those portions of our community that are more marginal. And we are seeing a lot of that loss move to either the Inland Empire, where things are far less expensive to survive in California, or they're leaving the state. So the idea that they would be able to afford to return to Burlingame just because the pandemic ends, let's say tomorrow, is pretty unlikely. Yeah. We are seeing those losses not just throughout the state, but our county is reflective of that. So every one of our schools in our county is seeing that loss this year. Public schools, pardon me, all of our public schools.
Are you seeing any inter-district requests right now with us having gone back and so many areas around us not back yet?
Yeah, our inter-district remains strong for us. We always have over 200 students. I am seeing enrollment and TK enrollment for this coming year lower than we typically are at this time of the year. So parents, if you're out there watching, teachers, if you're in touch with folks that have kindergartners, get them to register, because it is a little alarming. We're not seeing the registration. I'm being told anecdotally from parents that's because they're waiting to see what we look like next year, right? They might take one of those options of a different school, whether it's a private one or something else for preschool or kindergarten, if we're not open in a regular stance, and we don't know the answer to that yet. So I think there's some hesitancy until they can predict for their own childcare reasons which option they take. But it also might be a reflection that we just have fewer children of school age in the community right now. It's a really weird time. I wish I had better answers for you, but we just don't know how all this is going to pan out, Trustee Reed.
Okay, and I have one last question.
Continuing that's what we're here for. That's good.
Continuing with the wet blanket. What is the plan if the COLA doesn't come through in May? If for some reason that doesn't happen, is there a contingency plan in place, or is it we have to wait until next year at this point?
If the COLA does not come through, there is no contingency at this point. So if the COLA doesn't come through, literally that second year out deficit expands back another $3.1 million more than what we're aiming for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. That was a great wet blanket question. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about attendance as well?
Of course.
Or enrollment, rather.
Sure.
I have a couple kind of around what Kate said. So who projects what our enrollment is going to be? The city?
No, we used to actually employ a demographer on a contract that used some pretty typical statistical tools to project enrollment. I don't want to go too deep into that. So I've actually been trained in those enrollment projections. So I've actually trained our fiscal staff. So we're doing it internally. So we were able to cancel that contract, saving a little bit of money, and our fiscal staff is actually maintaining enrollment projections now.
Okay, so because I was curious, we have all those complexes being built. I mean, it's over by California. So I was curious if those have been taken into account, and then also, do we have do we have any idea if we have, I know lots of people are leaving Oakland and San Francisco right now. Do we have any idea of any numbers that might be coming to Burlingame and also the city, or I'm sorry, the residences on California?
No, we are starting to see as residents open up, they have school age children. They do come to us and we enroll them immediately. And we have had some come this year for sure. The San Francisco exodus, there was actually a great New York Times article about this. It's cyclical. The Bay Area has always been cyclical. And the exodus is not largely leaving to stay in California. I don't know if you remember, if you were in California, the last exodus in 2008, that's where like Denver, Colorado got this huge population influx, right? So
yeah,
this
I
one,
read that article too, but
yeah, so this one, they're going to Texas and they're going to Arizona, where cost of living is less, and they could sell whatever they had here, and have a different lifestyle if that's what they were interested in. So that's where we're seeing the population shift. We're not seeing it shift necessarily to the Bay Area, sadly.
Got it.
Not right now. It's cyclical, but.
So in previous town halls, we've talked about flip-flopping between LCFF and basic aid.
Wow. That's a tough topic. Yep.
Because we've brought this up at other town halls, I wonder if you want to address where we're at with that.
I was not ready for that question tonight. I can tell you where we are, but I wasn't, that was something I wasn't going to discuss tonight. So basic aid is a very complex concept for folks to understand. When I got here, I looked at the projections for basic aid and I said to our finance department, they're wrong. We're going to be in basic aid next year. And I will share with the board that lo and behold, we got a call from the county about 3 weeks ago, and they're projecting we're going to be in basic aid next year. Now, we will probably flip-flop in and out of it over the 2 or 3 successive years, but that's all going to depend on a whole bunch of tax factors. So we are preparing a presentation on basic aid and going in and out that is scheduled for the board either in August or September. Basic aid, though, for the context of tonight's discussion, it is not a panacea. So all it means is that we get our funding, the LCFF formula funding, from our local property taxes entirely. The state doesn't have to backfill whatever local property taxes don't cover. So LCFF simply means that local property taxes come first to whatever you're entitled to as a school district, and then the state backfills whatever the gap is between local property taxes and the LCFF entitlement. When basic aid becomes advantageous, in brief, is when 3, 5, 10 years after you flip to being a basic aid, meaning you're funded only by local property taxes, anything over and above the entitlement that is apportioned to the school district, they get to keep. So right now we get about $8,800 per student as an LCFF district. Imagine 10 years after basic aid, our county is collecting $11,000 per student. That's when you start to see an advantage to being basic aid. So we're right on the cusp of that flip in the next 6 to 12 months under last December's fiscal outlook. Because of the new COLA that was just introduced by the governor, if it's passed, it might actually kick us flipping into basic aid further out, because then the entitlement goes up and property taxes might not keep up right away. So it's a very moving target. It's a pretty complex issue. So I've moved it off to August or September because it's just it's a rabbit hole, but that's the brief answer.
Thank you.
Sure.
Depends on how many people sell their houses too, right? I mean, that's going to have a big impact on it.
It can. Yep. Because that's when the actual property taxes change in California. They don't change under the existing owner. They only change when the house is sold.
Yeah.
Right, but then, so if we do switch to basic aid, declining enrollment is actually better for you, right?
So there is an incentive to have fewer children once you're basic aid, because then you don't, this is, my bias is going to show here. I don't like the way this is structured in California, because it incentivizes you not to take the children that want to be in your school from other community, because now that money is all being provided by your local taxpayers, And so you're incentivized to exclude anybody else for coming into your district instead of trying to get them to come in, right? So that might significantly endanger programs that we really value, like our dual language immersion program, right? Which we need to start actually getting students in whose primary language is Spanish to actually keep a true dual language immersion program. We're losing those students. But yes, you're absolutely correct, Trustee Wong. It becomes an incentive to have fewer students because then the amount you have per student goes up.
But if we do get a transfer, say, a child who wants our dual language immersion, their district that they were supposed to go to still gives us money for that student, right?
No.
They don't?
No.
Oh. Okay.
No, the district gives us nothing. It all comes from local property taxes in the state.
Oh, okay. They just get counted in our ADA right now.
Correct. We get the funding for them from the state.
I see.
Their home district does not.
Chris, a question about of the roughly 40 million-ish of expenses in the budget, how much of that is comprised of the employer contributions for pensions?
Oh, wow. Heather, are you on the call?
Yes, she is, Superintendent Mount Benitez. Let me find her and I will unmute her.
So Heather, while we're searching for you to unmute, don't worry about the exact number. Just give us a ballpark of what's the percentage of $40 million that's the PERS and STIRS total contribution from the employer.
Heather, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I'm having issues with the, so approximately 40 million. Gosh, I've never actually calculated, but I'd be happy to get back to you with it, but I don't
Just
have an
about.
approximate, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We can answer it another time. We can send it out tomorrow. Not a problem.
Absolutely, I can do that for you.
No problem. My only, let's just assume it's some number of millions, right? But
oh yeah,
yeah. My only caution would be, so the current projections show that we are now, scheduled to be in better shape, right, in a few years than it looked previously. Mm-hmm. The only caution I would have is that, like, I'd probably take the under or the over, depending on how you look at it, that like it's going to look worse than we actually think it will, because like if, in the update presentation that you shared earlier this month, we had the SSC district scorecard, right?
Yep. And
I think incorporated within your projections are the increase in our contribution rates for the employer portions pretty significantly from this year in a couple of years. So the good news is we've already factored that in, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Which is one of the big things that, as we talked before, is sort of like creates this sort of creep in expenses that's higher than you would think. The bad news potentially is that like that is assuming that sort of the reported actuarial assumptions and what have you that CalSTRS and CalPERS produces are accurate, which they very, if I had to guess, are probably not, right? So they're going to make it look like we're less underfunded than we really are, because they're going to use unrealistic discount rates and return assumptions. And if all you do is tweak that by 1 or 2%, whatever millions that we have to contribute could double, and so like that is a big swing factor that we have to think about. I'm not saying that changes like the decision of your recommendation. I'm saying that as we consider all these different things, like it is probably likely that we're going to have to revisit this in one form or another. So yeah, I mean, like even like the scorecard from, I guess, a couple weeks ago, in that presentation has like the 10-year treasury assumed to be, 0.98 over the course of this school year and 1.48 for next year. And currently the 10 years at 1.4 basically.
Yep.
So it just goes to show that like these assumptions are probably wrong. We don't know which direction, but we can try to be prudent about which direction that probably is. So yeah, anyway, and so it'd be curious, just like what, I can't remember what that number is, but how much of that is the contribution. But yeah, that's one thing that immediately stands out as probably a risk factor.
It is, and the Cal STRS, which is our teacher retirement system, it actually does max out at 25%. The Cal PERS doesn't have a maximum, which is scary, and it does go up a lot every year. So it's one of the biggest factors in our annual escalating costs. You're correct.
Can I ask one last question?
Of course.
It's mostly just about staffing, because I know we had quite a few teachers take the incentive. And so where we're sitting now is we have less certificated staff, but probably not necessarily in line with where the kids are in school. So will you look at shuffling? How does that process work to make sure that we have the right teachers at the right sites to cover the amount of kids we have?
So really high level, because there's a lot of details that go into that, because that's largely governed by contract actually. So when we actually get our enrollment numbers pretty solidified throughout the spring and going into the summer, then we make sure that we have enough teachers that are already under contract, our teachers that are assigned to the right sites to make sure that their certification area matches the need of how many students are at each site. So that's how it's supposed to be done, and it's supposed to be done annually, because obviously our demographics shift. So for example, the students being generated by the developments that Trustee Mudd is referencing will fall both within Roosevelt, a little bit in McKinley, and a little bit in Washington in the developments going up. So as that happens, we'll need more teachers maybe to move over there. So that should be happening every year, and we have the ability to do that. Now, what's the function for it happening? So for example, let's say we have an opening at, let's see, Jude presented tonight. So we'll say Franklin. So we need another teacher at Franklin. So the first thing that Allison does is she announces it to all of the teachers to see if anybody would like to volunteer because they have friends at Franklin, or they really like the Franklin community, or, it could be all sorts of different reasons. And so we always take volunteers first. And then if we don't have a volunteer, it goes by seniority. So then we look for sites that we have more staff at than we need. And then we take the person that's lowest on the seniority list that has the correct certification.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question around staffing as well. I saw that the world language teacher at BIS that was 0.833% time is leaving. And I was curious, if we aren't backfilling those positions, will we still be able to serve foreign language to all the students at BIS that want a foreign language?
So what we're doing with that one is that we've had declining enrollment in, so I removed the identifying features of those positions. That's why they were as generically listed as they were, because I don't want folks to say, oh, that's so-and-so's position, right? They must be leaving, even though their retirements were made public at the last board meeting because they had to submit resignations to get the incentive money. And so basically BIS will be focusing on its language offerings being in Spanish, which has been the highest demand area. And it's also been tough to continue to recruit for multiple languages. So it'll be focused in the future on Spanish.
Will all the kids be able to take a Spanish lesson if they want it?
I don't run the school. I really can't answer. I'd have to ask Pam that question. Okay. I just don't know the answer.
Okay.
And I don't know if she's on the call, or I'd ask her to answer it, but I have no idea if she's on the call.
I don't want to put her on the spot. I can reach out to her later.
Okay.
questions? I think this was a very thoughtful presentation.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. I
Well,
don't know if you want to-
there's no action needed. So the actions that you'll be taking are actually at the March 9th meeting. So you'll just be, at that point, it'll just be a vote to approve the slate of reductions, positional reductions. And then for any positions that are actually not vacant. And so of the list that we presented tonight, 2 of those positions are not vacant. Then they will be counted as layoffs effective June 30th, or at the end of the day, June 30th. So that pretty much concludes anything if there's no further questions.
Right?
Great. I know we do have a closed session to return to.
Yeah, so we have the board requested items next. Does anyone have any board requested items to bring up?
So I heard 2 questions tonight that we couldn't answer, so I will get the board answers to those questions.
All right, thank you. Okay, so then we should reconvene to closed session.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Chris, for working on this. You guys put so much time and effort into making it very cohesive and understandable. And I think you guys did an awesome job of really digging in and making sure that we were fiscally responsible, but also keeping in mind kind of the personnel component of it. So thank you for all your work on it.
Absolutely. That's what we're supposed to do. So it's not happy stuff. It gets us in good shape. And we really are minimizing the number of actual people we're impacting. So that's good to keep in mind.
Yeah. Great.
All right, so we'll leave this meeting and go to closed session and then come back, right?
Correct.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.